Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 3. It is perhaps ironic that a series that introduced comedy into the Marvel Universe should come around to be the most serious and grounded Marvel movie of its era. This doesn't rely on jokes, time travel, multiverses, crossovers, or a parade of cameos. It is a film that stands apart on its own 2 feet and strides under its own power. This is a remarkable experience that, on first watch, I absolutely hated. Hated it. Most irritatingly, the best 3D moments were the parts I hated the most. These dark and dreary caged animal scenes holding me captive with bars that looked absolutely stunning in stereo. What made these scenes so brutally effective is this movie's choice of realistic 3D. So when we are gazing at the world from a toddler's point of view, we feel small, while the cage's cruel bars looked enormous and strong. Notice how in the 3D edition they tended to exaggerate these steel pipes. Everything is naturally big and fall apart when you're close to the ground, with the outside left distant and unreachable. For me, this madness was just too effective. Add in the awful, shrill voice of that bad guy constantly looking down and screaming at the camera. I felt small, trapped, and berated, and that touched a raw nerve deep inside of me, and I hated how it made me feel, to the point that had I went to see this alone at the theater, I would have left. As it was, I spent much time just staring off into the darkness, just trying to shut out what I was seeing, unfortunately. But despite becoming completely divorced from the story, I could still appreciate how well the visuals were composed. But that realistic approach to 3D that was so effective in the cruel lab left many moments flat or near flat. We find ourselves in lots of big spaces with big machines and facing big animals that, due to their size, are seen with little to no depth. The open air and space vistas mimic the flat sky we see in real life and in natively shot 3D. And this was all meant for and did look amazing on an IMAX theater, but so often felt like a lost stereo opportunity. To be fair, I suppose avoiding hyper-stereo shots does have value in preventing 3D fatigue, an opportunity to rest your eyes in preparation for better stereo moments. It could be argued that this may even be a sensible approach to sitting through a 2-hour 3D movie. However, I feel a strict adherence to realism leads to clashes with the actual content, such as the gaze out of this window. It's not so much that it's a fairly shallow moment, it's that I think some stereo exaggeration would have drawn me closer in. The difference between looking in on someone or feeling that you're there beside them too. Another example is the title shot. Little to no space. I felt it worked against the excitement of an opening splash and kept the characters distant. I feel exaggerated stereo would have put us more on the ground with them coming toward us, but instead we're gazing at an eternal distance at them. The choice is consistent with the rest of the movie, but I felt that consistency was at the expense of how it impacted the various moments. Imagine if they used the same camera lens for every shot in the film. Any connection between the 3D and the action felt sadly haphazard. As I mentioned, this was a rare movie where I became very aware of my reactions and feelings are such a strange thing, especially when I don't even know they are there. I remember being in my old neighborhood and having a walk past the school I once went to. It was a frightful monstrosity of brick and stone that was old when old was young, and seemingly destined to outlive the earth itself. But to my surprise, I found it gone. Completely gone. Just a grass-covered field now. And to my further surprise, I felt like dancing. A massive balloon of joy welled up inside of me. I was so happy to see that place wiped from existence. And I had to step outside myself and wonder, wow, where'd that come from? Until that day, I didn't really appreciate how much resentment I perhaps had for that time of my life. I'm not even sure I exactly remember why. There are many moments in this movie that just feel 3D. Here we see an X-ray of Rocket's heart pumping that the camera pans over, giving us a great perspective of where it sits inside his body. It's a great effect that creates a stereo illusion even when watching the flat edition of the movie. In fact, I'd say the stereo effect adds very little, yet it remains cool, it remains 3D. It's just a moment that feels like stereo, and the brain just readily accepts it as is. Check out also this reflection in Rocket's eye. Here is a moment the conversion team could have been lazy about, but instead gave us a magnificent reverse fisheye reflection in 3D with the subjects separated out and occupying their own space. Have you ever seen something like that in a 3D conversion before? So much little detail to appreciate here. Perspective is such an interesting thing. Some of the more interesting perspectives were found inside a weird flesh city. In what may even be an analogy for introspection, we find our heroes cutting through a layer of artificial skin to get inside this place that I'm guessing is grown rather than built. Inside it was colorful, bright, with long hallways and holes and everything. The whole place just seemed to scream, look at me in 3D. Webbing seemed to be everywhere, giving an intricate feel to the stereo landscape, which again, the stereo wasn't all that strong. The setting just worked really well with it, showing us curves and bumps that naturally stood out and demanded to be felt rather than seen. Again, we get camera positions that not only get attention, but also have a way of bringing out the stereo effect. Take this security cam angle that makes the people look like mere chessboard pieces. The 3D, though, is generally at its best when we had someone front and center, like here with Groot's big action moment, poking out in every direction. Now, I would have preferred to see this sort of thing really come off the screen, but it was still enjoyable as is. Although the visuals go very deep into the screen, nothing ever really came out. There were some moments, such as this pointing shot, where it seemed even a bit odd that it didn't come right out at us. That true type of pop-out experience doesn't really happen with these big-budget conversions, so for the most part, it's not expected, so it's not missed. Except during the frame-breaking moments. I found when they crossed into the black, it didn't float far enough above the black bars to feel separated, and that kind of made the bits and pieces that came out look like a cardboard overlay, feeling painted on rather than flying out. This scene was intended to be a circus, so I think some old-school 3D nose poking would have fit in very well here. Oh well. There are some weird changes also from the two-dimensional version. Nothing too crazy, but you do have some interesting comparisons. Notice these backgrounds that get swapped out. A commenter on a past video of mine mentioned that these movies are worked on until just days before the release. So as a consequence, the conversion team doesn't always work on the final versions of some scenes. Perhaps that is what we're seeing here, some early renders that were later updated. There are things that get played around with weirdly, like I wonder why this cockpit needed such a makeover, or why would the lights on this collar be different? Perhaps, I wonder, are we looking at a different render using different animation timing? That might explain why these fire flames have changed shape but are largely in the same location. In a few large shots, we get just seemingly random bits taken out here and there. I can see how lights might distract from the 3D effect, but the removal of some other objects are less clear. Maybe it's just easier to erase some problem details rather than mask them out. Or maybe I'm just looking at things that were added in the final days. Story-wise, well, I suppose it's good that I decided to give this another watch. In the present day, some 2 years after its release, I can see it now as a remarkable movie. Dark, but not quite the tone-deaf celebration of suffering I imagined I saw the first time. The cage scenes that felt like they dragged on for an eternity were really quite brief and succinct. I can appreciate the light-hearted side quests as the tension breakers they were intended to be. Had I reviewed this, though, 2 years ago, I would have been slinging out all sorts of reasons why hating this movie was intellectually correct. And I don't suggest that I would have been wrong then and correct today, but rather this has been a curious lesson in how I feel things first and then just think of reasons for it after. It's fascinating to experience how the brain follows what's buried in the heart. As it's been said, a crooked heart will not discover any good. I distinctly remember sitting in the theater during the bombing of the Furies and thinking, oh, they're playing rock music now, like I'm supposed to be enjoying a massacre. Ironically, my attitude was most mirrored by the bad guy, who I hated so much, who spent the entire movie finding fault everywhere but in himself.